Shabbat Shalom. I want to begin this evening by acknowledging that although we are gathering virtually, Holy Blossom Temple is situated in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Windot, and Mississaugas of the New Credit. Indigenous peoples who have lived on this land for thousands of years before us. The name Haudenosaunee translates to the people of the longhouse, or a people who built a house. And the longhouse is considered to be a place of gathering, a place of sharing stories, of learning, of culture and respecting of elders. And we, the Jewish people, consider ourselves a people of the book. And we gather in our houses of worship for the purpose of study and learning and growth. So let us begin our learning this evening with the acknowledgement that colonization is an ongoing process, with native lands still being occupied due to broken and, in cases, deceptive treaties. We, as relative newcomers in this place, each have a role in reminding ourselves and each other about the land that we inhabit today. And this week in particular, we found ourselves grappling with two powerful emotional states, both celebration and reconciliation. Canada Day brought with it complex feelings of pride and privilege and freedom, and at the same time, recognition of very painful truths in Canada's history. As restrictions eased and Canada Day celebrations adorned many backyards, many public parks, the country also reckoned with the legacy of residential schools as more unmarked mass graves continue to be confirmed. For many of us, Canada represents a place of refuge and safe haven, a place of acceptance and celebration of cultural differences, a place where we can live out our Jewish heritage and be welcomed into the greater Canadian social experience. And we at Holy Blossom understand this deeply, as a number of our members this year were presented with the prestigious Order of Ontario and Order of Canada. As we read in our Siddur every Shabbat, we understand Canada to be to the world an example of justice and compassion, and we pray weekly, cause us to see clearly that the well-being of our nation is in the hands of all of its citizens. We now measure these positive associations with the challenging perspective of a Canadian history that is less pleasant to speak about. Just yesterday, Toronto Mayor John Tory and friend of Holy Blossom posted online in a tweet saying, "Today, flags at City Hall will be flown at half-mast as people across Canada continue to honor the Indigenous children whose lives were taken, and as Canadians reflect on the tragedies brought forward by residential schools." And over the course of the last year, many of us have taken it upon ourselves to educate and re-educate ourselves, to learn and unlearn, to understand the far-reaching outcomes of the Indian Act and its subsequent legislations. It is a matter of public record that when first introduced in 1876, this act sought to eliminate First Nations culture in favor of assimilation into a Euro-Canadian society. And the act has been amended several times, most significantly in 1951 and in 1985, with changes mainly focusing on the removal of discriminatory sections. And nonetheless, it is an evolving, in many cases paradoxical document that has enabled trauma and human rights violations and social and cultural disruption for generations of Indigenous peoples. And the residential school system likewise created to remove Indigenous children from the influence of their own culture and assimilate them into a dominant Canadian culture And over the course of the system's more than 100 years of existence, around 150,000 children were placed into residential schools nationally. As more work is being done to understand the deep intergenerational trauma these schools have made, we now know that of all of the children whose souls were tragically lost through this abusive and neglectful system, that 49% of deaths are listed without a known cause. 43% of the deaths were listed without a location. And perhaps most troublesome and telling of the dehumanization that these children faced, 32% of deaths were recorded without even a listed name. This Canada Day, thousands and thousands of individuals here in Toronto and around the country chose to keep their red and white outfits in their wardrobes and instead took to the streets in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of this land, wearing symbolic orange shirts, reinforcing the message that every child matters. These demonstrations of support and calls for reconciliation and decolonization are testaments to the goodwill of the Canadian people. This is exactly the type of compassion and justice for which we pray Canada will be defined. Not the deeds committed by earlier generations, but rather we shall be judged by our response to the tribulations of our day. In this week's Torah portion, Moses continues to prepare the Israelites for life in the Promised Land, and we learn a life they will have to navigate with a different leader. Parshat Pinchas reflects Moses' understanding that in the future, the community's challenges will come from both within and without. This resonates deeply this year, as Canada combats forces beyond its control from without, like the COVID-19 virus and now the raging wildfires, as well as the challenges from within, facing our history, crafting meaningful ways of moving forward. In order to successfully establish themselves as a sovereign nation, the Israelite people will need to be able to defend themselves from the threats of other nations while also maintaining stability and peace among themselves. Overcoming the threats from their enemies will require physical prowess on the battlefield. And on the other hand, much like contemporary Canada, meeting the dangers from within will require not physical, but interpersonal capabilities, including the ability to keep one's word. In our own day, we reflect on the power of words, and our tradition gives us hope in that regard. When we finish a book of the Torah, as we will in just another week or so, even knowing that the following week we will start a new book, we still say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek, be strong, and we will strengthen one another. We are not alone. And even as we come to an end, there will be a new beginning. And may the text of the next book in the saga of Canadian history be one of respect for our neighbors and mutual responsibility for each other's well-being. For all peoples who call this land home, let us find comfort and solace this Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.